name is Carla Gonzalez. I'm from Los Angeles, California. Woo! I am born, bred, raised, everything in Los Angeles. My family came from El Salvador. Woo! That's right, all my truchas in the house. My family came from El Salvador in the early 80s, 80 and 81. Both my parents migrated here with all of my family. I grew up in I was the only Salvadorian in a very Mexican neighborhood. That was my reality. That's all I knew. I didn't really leave my neighborhood outside of going to work with my parents, right? So going to more rich houses, or la casa de los americanos, that's what we call them, you know. Later I knew that I was one of them too, but I didn't understand what americano meant, right? It meant white folks to me and my family. So I grew up in a very Mexican neighborhood. I grew up being the only Salvadoreña, understanding that my family spoke differently, understanding that my family looked different, right? I was very much one of the darker ones in my family, and then in my neighborhood, in my classrooms, all of that. Somebody said I was really smart. One of the teachers was like, look, Mom, you need to put her in some magnet classes, you need to put her in some, classes that are going to advance her, because this school is not going to keep her there. My first language was Spanish. I spoke Spanish to the age of 11, even though I was born in the States, because nobody actually noticed that I wasn't learning English. It just kept pushing me through the school system, and I was a great Spanish speaker, and I was a great translator for my parents, but I didn't know how to be fluent, right? In 8th grade, I was pulled out of my neighborhood, which was all that I ever had known, and put into a multiracial school. I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. People came from different countries. People had different languages. Like, all I knew was television, right? What the media showed me, which back in the 90s wasn't a lot of stuff. It was my first time, 14 years old, Carla, little backpack, walking, to my little school bus, being bussed out 30 minutes out to a different reality. I had no idea how to interact with people, what to talk about, what we had in common, how to say, oh, I like your bag. I didn't know anything outside of my own culture. I met Asians, I met, different types of white ethnicities, which I didn't know existed. But most importantly, I met Black folks, which for some of you who are not from the West Coast, might be a little bit like, what? Like, you didn't know Black folks? In Los Angeles, and in general on the West Coast, Black folks are very much the minority in population. And so for me, my family never exposed me. It was a very big cultural difference. I soon understood that most of those Black folks lived literally 10 minutes away from me, in the other part of the, poor neighborhood that we didn't go to because we stayed in our part of the poor neighborhood, right? So I'm an 8th grader, I'm learning all this stuff, Romeo and Juliet, all the random shit that they try to teach you in school. Pardon I should really not cuss for the children. I understood that year that my family had a lot of anti-Blackness running through us that I didn't even know existed. By just the very language, right? My family called me La Negrita. I just thought that was an endearing term for my dad because I was much darker than him. I then understood that Black folks were called that as a way to bring them down by Latinos, by people like me, right? So it was super big epiphany that I didn't know. As I grew older and I went to high school and different things, I started to really understand what it meant for our communities for me as a Salvadoreña in particular, as a person who came from a country who was torn by civil war, who in 1932, if you called yourself negro, called yourself indígena, you were murdered, right? Over 42,000 indigenous people in El Salvador were just wiped out because they were claiming their roots. As a Salvadoreña, I didn't know what it meant to be Afro-descendiente or that there was even black folks there, right? 11th grade, I met one of my best friends, Tanya Bernard. Raise your hand. Yep, right there. Who we met, and I was like, oh, that's a cool girl. Well, let's talk. Blah, blah. I go to her house, I see her family pictures, and I'm like, whoa, this is super different. And then walks her dad, this black man speaking full-on Spanish, super fast, like crazy, right? And I'm like, holy shit. Oh, holy moly. I have never in my life met a black person that speaks Spanish. I'm 17, 16 years old. That was in my reality. I went home, I asked my parents, I said, ¿de dónde somos? Where do we come from? And they're like, where do you come from? We're Salvadorian. I'm like, okay. But what did my grandpa, how did they look? What happened? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're Salvadorian. So I'm like, all right. I chose to be pro-black at a very young age, which cost me my family, basically. Side note, came out as queer, and side note, all my friends are black. My family thought I was going through something very, very different. I chose to be in multiracial organizing because it felt like I needed to be part of a lot of things I didn't grow up knowing. Even though I knew my experience, I knew what it felt like to go to immigration with my family, I knew what it felt like to translate, I knew all this stuff. I didn't know what it was to be black in Los Angeles, and I had lived there my whole entire life. So I became an organizer at a very young age and was exposed to a lot of black feminism, basically. I read a whole bunch of stuff, watched a whole bunch of stuff, and just became a person that I wanted to create a family, I wanted to create a community where I felt like the people that I love the most, my family and my friends, could be in a space where nobody's getting called something derogatory, where if you get called something derogatory, you get told, hey, that's not cool. Most of us are in our families, we're the weird ones. We're the ones that que dicen algo, ay, no digas eso, no, ¿para qué quieres problemas? Like, that I'm that person. So, when I was 16, I was kicked out. I'm back at my parents' home. Salvadoreños todavía no hablan inglés, they don't speak English yet very well. My family, and Tanya can tell you, any of my friends, they were cruel human beings. But I made it a point in my life to push back on my 69-year-old grandmother. I made it a point to push back on my very abusive father on things that are just wrong, right? We all know what's wrong. And sometimes, for me, it was like, okay, do I take a second to be that person again, or should I just let it go? And for me, I always took that second, right? My little brother had two siblings. One is really, really, really light-skinned, hazel eyes. And then there's this other one who's like dark-skinned, has curly hair, and every time he gets in front of the police, when they check out a box, it says black. Every time. They don't ask him, they assume he's a black man. So I knew in my family there had to be something. There had to be a way back in connection to our blackness, which would then inform how we in the future, as my children and my family, relate to black folks. And thankfully, I work I work with Dignity and Power Now. It's an organization in Los Angeles that works with formerly incarcerated folks that are inside, and their loved ones. My brother has been in prison for now 10 years. He's serving a 30-year sentence. And because of the messed up prison system, my family, and particularly my parents, opened their eyes to what injustice looks like. But it wasn't enough to just look at what injustice looks like for our families, but to really see what it looks like for folks that are like us, but also folks who don't look anything like us, but have a lot of commonalities with us. I am proud to say that this last birthday, my mother turned 52, and for her birthday party, she invited all of my friends to go eat her food at her house, and it was beautiful. And she doesn't know how to speak English, they don't know how to speak Spanish, and yet they still figured that shit out, right? Because there was a level of respect, a level of I want to know, and a level of I'm still freaking ignorant. And I might say some shit that's really offensive, and I trust that you and I will check myself on that, right? So that's my time. I will pass it to Merv. Thank you very much.